Okay, I decided to take a deep dive into Jay Embry's informant theory timeline. Now, this is all my opinion. I personally do not think that anything drugs was involved with the Idaho killings. Now, I'm not naive. I know college students do drugs. I know they do recreational drugs. That's one of those things that's a given. But I don't believe that drugs were the reason why they were killed. And so I'm not ignoring that there isn't drug trafficking and other issues going on in the Northwest. But I just don't believe that that's what happened here. I also don't believe that the two people he's thinking are informants. So I am going to take a look into this timeline that he's posted over his last several videos and to give you my opinion on it based on what I have found and what I have researched. And this is going to be a long video, so if you don't want to watch it, you don't have to, or you can fast forward or watch in different segments. But let's get started.
To his timeline, though, we need to recap where we're at to this point. And that's the history of the Moscow unalivings. And again, we've got the arrest of Kernodle on August 21st. In 2021, a drug mule was arrested transporting drugs from Spokane to Moscow.
Okay, Jay's timeline is kind of a little messed up because he put that she was arrested on August 21st of 2022, and then it goes on to talk about August 2021 arrest. And she actually was arrested twice based on the same charge. So her initial arrest was August 13th of 2021. And then she ended up being a fugitive from justice. So she was arrested again on August 19th of 2022. So I think Jay got the dates a little confused. And then he also says that she was arrested for being a mule and trafficking drugs between Spokane and Moscow. But there's no indication that that's what she was doing. She was arrested in Kootenai County. So there's no indication she was running them between Spokane and Moscow. So I just wanted to add, I haven't found any indication of where, if she was selling drugs, she was selling them. Okay, so here's her case information, and this shows you the original arrest date of August 13th, 2021. And it does list Ann Taylor as an active attorney, but that's because Ann is the chief public defender, so she's over all the attorneys in the office. Her assigned attorney was actually Christopher Schwartz. So she was not with Ann Taylor. And then here was the charges: possession of a controlled substance with the intent to deliver, controlled substance possession of, and then a probation violation was added on later. Now, to make things even crazier, she also had an arrest on 11/21 of 2022, completely separate set of charges for possession. You can see it was also that lawyer, Christopher Schwartz, again. And the probation violation was also tacked on to this one.
June 22nd, we got the Hat Rock arrest.
Okay, so Corey Hatrock is Maddie Mogan's stepmom. And you can see she was arrested in June of 2022. Also lists Ann Taylor, but Ann was not her attorney. And her charges were possession of controlled substance and drug paraphernalia, and then possession with intent to sell.
We got the Quad Cities Drug Task Force pouncing on them, trying to turn them into informants, which they do successfully.
Okay, I don't agree with his assessment that the Quad Cities Task Force was turning them into informants. And I will show you my reasoning why I don't believe that. So the Quad City Drug Task Force is a multi-jurisdictional task force that has law enforcement from Clarkston, Lewiston, Moscow, and Pullman. You can read the list of the task force members. I don't believe they would be involved in turning anyone into an informant that's arrested in Kootenai County. Not that these jurisdictions don't help each other out, but the Quad Cities Task Force would generally not be involved in anything up in Kootenai County. Now, he's saying they turned him into informants successfully because he's basing that on their plea deals, but I really don't see anything big in their plea deals that's out of line that would indicate that they became informants. So here are Xana's mom's charges, and you notice they have those 137, 2732A, and C and all that. That relates to the state law. So you'll see for possession of a controlled substance with intent to deliver, the 37, 27, 32, 1A, that the penalty may be imprisonment for a term of years not to exceed life imprisonment or fine not more than $25,000. So it just says maybe. It doesn't mean they have to impose that. Now, for the possession charge under C1, it also says the sentence may be imprisoned for not more than 7 years or fined not more than $15,000. So again, it doesn't say that has to be the sentence. Now, here's Maddie's mom's charges, and she has basically some of the same charges, but I am outlining one of the different ones she had, which is 37, 27, 34A3, which says you may be imprisoned for not more than 1 year and fined for not more than $1,000 or both. And that was for the unlawful possession. Now, I don't think the sentences that either woman ended up getting was out of line, and I don't think it shows any sort of informant plea agreement. What happens with drug addicts is you can sentence them and keep resentencing them, and it doesn't really work. So is there really a point to giving them the maximum? It's better to try to get them into some sort of rehab program, but both women did end up being sentenced to jail time, but Jay goes on to say no.
Look at her charges. I mean, look at her details right here. What kind of confinement did she have? You can see over there at Miss Kernodle's confinement, it says state prison. No, not Miss Hatrock. It says county jail. Kootenai County Public Safety Building for a discretionary term of 90 days. That 3 to 4 years never happened. Look underneath that where it says penitentiary suspended, and she got credit for time served. 90 days was her sentence, and she was out of that public safety building in Kootenai County. She was an informant, folks. There is no doubt. Now let's look at Miss Kernodle. She was sentenced to state prison 2 to 3 years. But look, you can see it says retained jurisdiction for 365 days. And look at the condition at the bottom. That's not 2 to 3 years in prison. That's felony probation for 3 years, starting 2/2/24 to 6/21 of 23. Neither one of them got a second of prison time, folks. Those are informants.
Well, actually, Jay, they both did jail time. This is for Maddie's stepmom, Corey Hatrock, and you can see that in December of 2022, she was, in fact, in jail. She asked for a motion for temporary release, and they did grant her release on her own recognizance. The judge had no objection to furlough. I believe that was for the memorial service that she was given the furlough. And then in July of 2023, July 13th of 2023, there was the order for her release. So she actually served jail until July. Now this is for Xana's mom. And I'm just scrolling down here because it's showing you what she was kind of originally sentenced for on those initial charges. So originally she had like 60 days in jail, and then she had the fines, and then she ended up with 3 years in prison. And you can see felony probation, February 2nd, 2024, because she violated her probation. So this was all of her status conferences with her failures to appear. Scrolling down through that whole list, starting clear back in August of 2022. She was also granted a furlough to go to the memorial service, and then that's when she took off to Spokane and didn't reappear. So you're seeing failed to appear, you're seeing the bench warrant. They did do a warrant recall, and then they had a new status conference, and then in January of 2023, they issued another warrant. And then she was caught up in Spokane. And then she tried to get a furlough again. And they did deny it. So she was... she also tried to get a change of venue. And I believe when I was scrolling through her, I also saw that she was trying to get her sentence reduced as well, which they didn't. And then this was her Spokane arrest. So you can see when she didn't come back after the memorial service, she was arrested February 7th of 2023 in Spokane on a fugitive warrant. And this is her current status. She is in the state penitentiary in Kuna, Idaho. And she has one sentence satisfaction date of 9/22/2030. And on the other case, 10/5 of 2028. So she's serving them concurrently.
So what we're looking at here, okay, this is the federal indictment that I'm about 98% sure is for Miss Hatrock. And that's an indictment that's open when she becomes a informant in the case. And you can see they opened it on June 22nd.
Okay, Jay is throwing things out there just to see if something's going to stick to the wall. He has absolutely no clue who that federal indictment is for because it doesn't list a name. He put in the county and then dates he thinks matches up with his little informant theory and seems to think that that's for Corey Hatrock, but there's absolutely zero proof that that's for her.
To believe that the first person that Miss Kernodle actually turned in during her stretch as an informant is actually Miss Hatrock. I believe that was her first one. And I don't know what kind of rules they have set up, but I'm willing to bet it's 2 arrests to get their snitch card punched.
Okay, make this make sense. Because if he's saying that Kara was the snitch and turned in Corey and got Corey arrested, that doesn't work with the calendar. Because Kara had been rearrested in August of 2022 and then struck the plea deal in September of 2022. And that's the plea deal that Jay is claiming made Kara an informant. So if her first person she informed on was Corey, did she have a time machine? Because Corey was arrested in June of 2022. So Kara couldn't have been the snitch after becoming an informant in September.
September 13th, it becomes public knowledge. Kernodle accepts the plea deal. September 14th, major arrest in Moscow. TF and TR arrested on trafficking charges. That the Drug Task Force utilized these 2 arrests to gain information on 2 local drug distributors in Moscow. On September 14th, 2022, an arrest was made in Moscow, just 1 day after it became public that Kara's charges had been reduced. The task force had finally made a major arrest.
So I'm calling BS on his notion that Kara Kernodle's plea deal had anything to do with Tyson and Tanya's arrest. In fact, the Quad City Task Force had nothing to do with their arrest. They were arrested on August 31st, not September 14th. Not sure. I think he got it off the news article because it was written on September 14th and he didn't look further. But they didn't have warrants out for their arrest. The task force wasn't out there looking for them. You know how they were found? Tyson was passed out in his car in front of a Dollar Tree. Somebody called the police because he was passed out in his car. That's how they ended up getting found with drugs. Nothing to do with an informant or a plea deal. And don't believe me? Here's the article. So here's the article, and it talks about how on the morning of August 31st, Moscow police were called to check on a man who appeared to be passed out in a car parked at the Dollar Tree. They then obtained a search warrant for the vehicle after they observed what appeared to be drug paraphernalia inside the car. They found a pound of meth in the vehicle, along with marijuana and drug paraphernalia. 43-year-old Tyson Farley and 52-year-old Tanya Rhodes were arrested for felony methamphetamine trafficking.
October 21st, TF and TR are released from the county jail. One on furlough, one on bond, $75,000.
Actually, no, not October 21st. Tanya actually was out on bond on September 14th, and then Tyson was granted his furlough in September. He was granted the furlough on September 23rd, to be exact. And then in October, he never returned, so they issued a bench warrant for him on October 5th.
And then on November 11th, the last shoe fits, the last thing to hit the ground hits the ground. Hat Rock accepts a plea deal, and that becomes public knowledge.
I'm not sure where he's getting things for his timeline, but Hat Rock's sentencing was actually on November 7th.
November 13th, the atrocity on King Road occurs. Now, from December 2nd through December 6th, we have a little timeline here for TF because he's arrested up in Spokane on his absconding warrant, and he's transferred back to the Latah County Jail during those days.
Actually, no, Tyson was arrested up in Spokane on November 23rd. So he was already back in Latah County well before December. So you can see me scrolling through the case information from Spokane on his fugitive of justice warrant. And Spokane dismissed the fugitive charges, of course, after he was extradited to Latah County. And you can see he was arraigned in Latah County on December 1st of 2022.
Then on December 8th, an Amazon warrant is returned to law enforcement, totally redacted. Right now we're getting back into all the redactions. It's been my contention that that Amazon warrant came back to Kopaka. Well, it didn't come back to Kopaka. It came back to a lot of people, but Kopaka was later identified by informants.
So, yes, that warrant was returned on the 8th, but that date is really insignificant. The warrant was served on November 26th. It had nothing to do with Tyson Farley, nothing to do with him being an informant, and nothing to do with Kopaka.
December 14th, the search warrant's issued for Brent Kopaka's apartment. We know that because watching the police cam video, they let him know we have a search warrant to search your apartment, Mr. Kopaka. So that search warrant was issued on that day because that's the day that they go out and implore the search warrant.
Okay, a search warrant was issued for his apartment during the standoff. They did not go there to issue a search warrant. They went there because they were called by his roommate. But you can hear the female officer about 40 minutes into the standoff ask if she should go get a warrant. So I'll play the clip from the body cam footage.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go with Kayla and work on the search warrant. I'm gonna get it quickly. Does that work for you? Or do you want a search warrant as quick as possible?
Yep. Thank you. December 15th, Kopaka is shot by police during the search.
Again, he was not shot during the search. There was no search warrant prior to them getting to his apartment. An emergency search warrant was issued after the standoff. So to try to shade this as the standoff actually being the result of a search warrant is completely wrong. Here is the video footage of them when they first arrive and they talk to his roommate Jordan, the one who was the complainant, and these officers didn't even know for sure Brent's name. They had to ask. You'd think if they were going there with a search warrant that they would have known who, where they were headed, what apartment, etc. No, it was clear that they were just getting there because they were called because he was threatening his roommates, not because they had a warrant to serve.
We just got here, so I'll talk to you first. So what's going on?
So the last couple hours, he's been escalating. He's been getting very angry, talking to himself, talking nonsense.
Okay.
But it wasn't until the last hour when I was on a video cam with my friend right here where he threatened to shoot both me and my roommate. Made multiple threats over and over again. He's like,
where's your other roommate?
I think he's locked himself in his room because I saw his light on and he's trying to be quiet because I think he doesn't know what my roommate's like, up here. He doesn't
What's
know.
your other roommate's name?
Christian.
And
The guy
so
with
the
the
guy with
threat.
the threats
Is
and
Brent, yeah.
And Brent, he said his exact words were he's going to shoot you guys.
That he's like you better watch out because I'm about ready to shoot you in 5 minutes and saying crazy stuff like that.
Okay, and he's actually got a gun?
Yes, yeah.
What has he got? What kind of a gun?
Rifle.
A rifle?
Something. Well, not like that, but he has a pretty big gun.
Pretty big gun?
Yeah.
Okay. Could you wait here, please? I'll be right back.
Also on December 15th, later on that day, Kohberger's pulled over with his father in Indiana. It's my contention that was just a simple drug interdiction stop. He asked the officer about the Kopacka shooting. Just another tie right there. Don't let anybody tell you Kopacka is nowhere involved in this case. They're steering you wrong.
So Kohberger didn't ask about the shooting. His father mentioned it, but he said there was a mass shooting, which was incorrect. But I believe the reason why his dad brought up the shooting was because they were receiving these alerts as they were traveling. So this was the first one from WSU at 3:02 a.m. Pacific time, which said SWAT is actively working on the south side of campus, shelter in place until further notice. And then they sent out about an hour later another alert which said Pullman PD have resolved the situation adjacent to the Pullman campus and have declared an all clear. Then they put out one more alert that the incident had ended close to 4:30 a.m. So Kohberger would have received all these when he was driving. So he was probably talking to his dad about, hey, there's an incident on campus. It appears his dad was simply using that as small talk with the officer because they had asked where they were coming from and his dad had said WSU. There is nothing reading into that about an alleged connection to Kopacka.
Now, December 16th, TF is transferred from Judge Megan Marshall to Judge John Judge's court.
Well, that was actually the 15th, not the 16th. And the reason why he was moved from Marshall to Judge is because once you are indicted or you choose to make a plea and waive your preliminary hearing, you are moved to the district court judge.
Interesting date. December 18th, a warrant is returned to law enforcement from Reddit. Now, what could have been on that Reddit warrant returned? I think maybe you're going to start seeing some conversations on that one that they would not know about at that time, but they would later figure out that Mr. Kopacka and Mr. Kohberger talked to each other through Reddit.
Not sure why the 18th's interesting to him, but the warrant actually came back on December 19th, and surprise, it had nothing to do with Kopacka or Kohberger. The Reddit warrant was actually served for Kaylee Gonsalves.
The investigation is continued. December 19th, TF and TR are given an extremely generous plea deal that I've titled the Deal of the Century.
Okay, so it wasn't on the 19th. He was arraigned on the 19th, and then the change of plea and the plea deal were done the next day on December 20th, but he was not sentenced until March. And then you said Tanya took her plea deal that same day, but that is absolutely not true. If you look at Tanya's, you can see that her arraignment wasn't until January 9th. She didn't take a plea until July 12th.
Here is what I mean when I say the deal of the century. Because as you see on the screen, this is TF's charges. Drug trafficking in methamphetamine. That is a Schedule II drug, folks. Over 400 grams, that's over a pound. Possession of a controlled substance, drug paraphernalia, possessions with intent to use, and a couple of probation violations as well. That was his charges. Now, who was the judge in the case? Well, it was switched over from Magistrate Judge Megan Marshall on December 16th to Judge John Judge on December 17th. And you can see this plea arrangement was made with John Judge on December 19th, 2022. You'll see I have it underlined there. And by the way, the actual plea went through and a probation was given to this gentleman on December 20th. Now, what is the possible sentence for somebody drug trafficking over a pound of MTH? Well, you can see this is an easy Google search where the Idaho legislature under section 37-2732B is 400 grams or more, such person shall be sentenced to a mandatory folks, minimum fixed term of imprisonment of 10 years. Means the judge doesn't have the power to impose a sentence of less than that. And fined not less than $25,000, not less. But I want you to remember that fined not less than $25,000, because let's see how much of a fine that he got. Okay, so here was his sentence right here. You'll see his confinement was the county jail, Latah, for 30 days. And you can see that 2 to 3 years sentencing. No, he wasn't even sentenced to probation for 2 to 3 years. His penitentiary suspended completely. He was charged $285.50 court cost. So, by reducing those charges from drug trafficking and having to give him 10 years and a $25,000 minimum fine, this guy got 30 days and paid $285 in court costs and walked on December 19th. Now, you think that's a little bit odd, folks? Who was all in?
So the reason why a mandatory minimum wasn't handed down was because one of the charges was dismissed. And that was the drug trafficking charge. Now, I have a feeling the reason why that was dismissed was because you had both him and Tanya that were at that car when he was passed out in it. And yes, there was drugs found, there was drug paraphernalia, but I believe they probably had a hard time proving that they were trafficking. Just the fact that they were found, like I say, he was passed out in a car, and he likely was high, is why he passed out. So unless they can prove that he was trafficking it for sure, they can't really make that charge stick. And it's obvious that he is a user of the drugs that he has, because that wasn't the first time nor the last time he was found passed out in a vehicle. He was caught later in Oaksdale, also passed out from drugs. So I believe that they dropped that charge because they couldn't prove the trafficking. So we end up going back to the other sentencing, like I showed before with Corey and Kara, which is where it is the judge's discretion. So his remaining charge would have been not more than 7 years and fined not more than $15,000. And again, judge's discretion. Now, a condition of his plea was that he do rehab. So they were trying to do diversion. And this is not unusual. I talked about it earlier, how a lot of times it does no good to just keep sentencing these people. So if we scroll down through here and you look, it talks about how he had probation, and it says, court readmitted defendant to probation on previously ordered terms of probation with the additional term to participate and successfully complete treatment of his choice, Good Samaritan treatment. So that was also why he didn't have a real heavy sentence. I don't think it had anything to do with being an informant. But he did violate his probation, so now Tyson is in the Idaho State Correctional Center in Kuna, Idaho. And his sentence satisfaction date will not be up until March 5th of 2028. So, hey, Jay, your boy's in prison. And here's how he violated his probation. You can pause and read, but he has a habit of passing out in vehicles.
Also on that date, according to nothing other than an insider leak, nothing has ever been made public about this other than that magic newspaper leak, that results are back from the IGG, according to the insider leak. Nothing else tells us that. So, in my opinion, that leak on the IGG was said to cover the informants turning in the people that they turned in. Now, whether they turned in the right people or not, that is of great contention. I contend that they didn't. I contend that they set him up. And I will go into a lot more about that in future videos, but right now I'm sticking to the facts.
Sticking to the facts, huh? And what would those be? Because your timeline is full of a lot of misinformation. Also, you really think that the Idaho State Police Lab in the state of Idaho would go through the expense of sending off the DNA to Othram and paying all that money just to cover for Tyson and Tanya to supposedly rat out Koberger? Yeah, no. We've all seen the Freedom of Information Act that showed the invoice for Othram. So I'm not buying that the IGG was to cover for informants.
So let's continue this timeline. December 29th, Brian Koberger is arrested in Pennsylvania. TF's plea deal, though, isn't finalized until March of 2022. I wonder why. Because on March of 2022 is when the Aryan Brotherhood drug trafficking organization is taken down. I wonder who took them down.
Here's my thoughts on that. I do not think that Tyson Farley or Tanya Rhodes had anything to do with taking down the drug ring. The Quad City Task Force is not mentioned at all in this press release from the federal government. The 27 people were basically all over on the west side of Washington, central Washington, over into the Tri-Cities area. They talked about Tacoma law enforcement, DEA out of Seattle. I'm not seeing anything talking about any of the task force in Idaho being involved at all. If anything, it would have been the one out of Coeur d'Alene, which actually has federal involvement. Like I say, the Quad City Task Force is not a federal task force at all. So there's nothing here that indicates to me that any of these people were taken down because of any information that was gleaned from small-time Moscow criminals Tyson and Tanya. And you can scroll through here. This shows you everybody that was arrested. Bonnie Lake, Spanaway, Edgewood, Shelton. There was a person down in Arizona, a person in Phoenix, Puyallup, Tacoma, Quilcene. And then this is going to show you the different agencies that were also working on this. So this task force was made up of organizations over there on the west side. And you can pause and read the rest of this article at your leisure.
Now look at May 15th. We finally get our other person back into this, TR. She's testifying via Zoom in a hearing there in Latah. And then on May 16th, 2022, Brian Koberger is indicted. That's interesting dates there, isn't it? Now wait a minute. Let's go into TR for a second. What happened to her? All right, her road to freedom, because you can see her judicial officer, John Judge. And again, you see her charges, drug trafficking and MTH over 400 grams. We already heard what the sentences was for that. And then, she also had a controlled substance possession of Mary Jane. And she pleaded not guilty on both of those. You see that, folks?
Well, actually, no, she did not have the trafficking charge on there. She just had a controlled substance delivery. So there was nothing with a mandatory minimum. And then we had already talked about her bond, and then she took her plea on July 12th. So she had originally pled not guilty, and then she took her plea deal clear in July. So, again, doesn't look like it had anything to do with Brian Koberger at all. And she did plead guilty to the possession and the delivery. And she was sentenced to 30 days in jail. And she ended up also having to complete recommended treatment. So again, a lot of these are diversion sentences, not sentences to be an informant. Whenever you see that they're wanting them into a treatment program, that is why. It's not because they're becoming informants. And surprise, Tanya also had a probation violation because, unfortunately, that's sadly what happens with addicts. They go back to doing drugs after they do their jail time and their treatment.
Well, this is the one that I'm questioning, folks. Because on May 15, 2023, at a status conference, original type status conference, Judicial Officer John Judge, hearing at 1 p.m. The hearing was held. It was held with her by Zoom. Now, wait a minute. Was it May 15th? Wasn't that the day the secret grand jury was being held? And it was being presided over by, Judge John Judge? So how is he presiding over a secret grand jury indicting Mr. Koberger, but he still found time to hear this little lady's Zoom comments on a status conference? How's that possible? I'll tell you what, it isn't possible, folks, because that is the informant testifying in the secret grand jury against Mr. Koberger. There it is, black and white.
Judge is not who presided over the grand jury. Also, a status conference is not testimony at a grand jury. And also, if Tanya was a confidential informant, you wouldn't even be able to see her hearing if she was giving testimony to the grand jury. It wouldn't show up. It would be sealed. So you're looking at a status conference with Judge thinking that it was for the grand jury when it absolutely, positively was not. Let's look. Notice how it says the Honorable Judge J. Gaskell, Senior District Judge presiding over the grand jury proceeding.
The last thing I want to say and point out is just bam, 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 folks. So,
what are you bamming about? There was nothing to bam about. Your timeline even has a lot of wrong dates, and you have shown nothing that definitively proves these people made any sort of informant agreements. Nothing at all.
now it all makes sense. Because when you look at the Steve G texts, it showed the video of the lady walking up to the dumpster that everybody thinks is debunked. I assure you it's not. That was her walking to that dumpster, folks. She testified in the secret grand jury. Steve G had talked to people who had been on that secret grand jury, and they informed him of the informant in the case. That's why he said this BITCCH is actually helping Koberger. That girl is a monster. He was talking about TR. It's all clear now.
Actually, no, Steve was talking about this woman, Amani El Aleli. This was from her Facebook page. She was testifying on behalf of the defense about the non-dissemination order and not lifting it. She was the second witness at the hearing back in June of 2023 about media bias and not lifting the gag order, because remember, the Goncalveses and their attorney wanted to lift that gag order. And here is the front page of the letter that she sent Jay Logsden. And here's the court document filed by Anne that you can find the information in about that woman. So it wasn't Tanya Rhodes that Steve was talking about. He was not talking about an informant. Here's the other thing. Why would Steve be upset at an informant? Why would he be saying that they were helping Brian Kohberger? Because the informant would have been providing information to help get him convicted. So did you even stop to think before you made all that up about Steve talking about Tanya Rhodes? Yeah, I don't think that Tanya or Tyson or Kara or Corey are informants. It looks like they've all been sentenced based on the crimes they were actually found guilty of. There was a lot of diversion that they tried to do with drug treatment programs. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work. You see probation violations. 2 of them are now spending time in the big house, and the other 2 are still on probation and doing drug treatment. So there's nothing that indicates to me at all that any of them were related to Kohberger's arrest. There's nothing that indicates Kopaka is related to this case at all. You can disagree with me. That's fine. Just like I disagree with Jay Embry's assessment. But I am just not seeing anything in any of their sentences, nothing that screams informant, nor am I seeing anything where 2 small-time Moscow drug people took down that ring over in the Seattle area. So I'm just not seeing it. I've looked through all those documents. I've looked through all those sentencing things. I've looked at all the dates of everything, and I am not seeing anything at all that associates them with the Moscow murders. So let me know if you have any questions.